Hey guys, tonight we are going to find ourselves somewhere very quiet, very old, and perhaps a bit forgotten. You are sitting in a high-backed chair, the kind made of heavy, dark mahogany and leather, so aged it has developed a fine network of cracks, like a map of a city that never was. You lean back, and the chair lets out a slow, rhythmic creak, a sound that seems to settle into the corners of the room. Outside, the world is dissolving into a soft, relentless rain. You can hear it tapping against the leaded glass windows. 1,000 tiny fingernails drumming a steady, hypnotic beat that tells you there is nowhere else you need to be. The glass is cool to the touch, and small rivulets of water trace unpredictable paths downward, blurring the street lamps into amber smudges in the distance. You turn your attention back to the room, where the air is heavy with a specific, comforting perfume. It is the scent of a private library that hasn't been dusted in a decade. You smell the sweet, vanilla-like aroma of decaying lignin in the old paper, a chemical signature of time itself. Mixed with this is the sharp, metallic tang of iron gall ink and the faint, dry musk of vellum. It's a thick atmosphere, one that feels like a physical weight on your shoulders, pressing you down into a state of total stillness. To your left, a small fire is dying in the grate. It doesn't roar, it merely hums, the embers glowing a deep, pulsing orange, occasionally clicking as the wood settles. The warmth reaches your shins, a gentle contrast to the drafty shadows of the high ceiling. On the desk before you lies a stack of maps. You reach out and run your fingers over the top sheet. It isn't the smooth, characterless paper of a modern printer. This is heavy, handmade rag paper, textured and slightly uneven. You feel the ridges of the fibers under your pads, the way the surface yields just a fraction under your touch. The edges are deckled and soft, frayed by centuries of wandering hands. You pick up a magnifying glass, its brass handle heavy and cold in your palm, and you begin to peer at the ink. The lines are delicate, drawn by a hand that has long since returned to the earth. Yet the intent remains. You notice the way the ink has bitten into the fibers, creating a topography of its own. You've likely spent your day navigating a world defined by satellites and precision, where every square inch of the planet is accounted for by a blinking blue dot on a glass screen. It's a bit exhausting, isn't it? The certainty of it all. But here, in the amber glow of the study, that certainty feels thin. You are looking at a map from a time when the world was still a series of rumors. You see coastlines that taper off into nothingness, labeled with the elegant, flowing script of a cartographer who was essentially guessing. There is a certain honesty in that kind of ignorance. You find yourself smiling at a mountain range drawn where you know a desert should be. It's a gentle sort of error, a reminder that for most of human history, we were just wandering in the dark, trying to make sense of the shapes we saw in the fog. You pick up a small, silver paperweight. It's shaped like a sleeping hound, and move it to the corner of a particularly stubborn scroll that wants to curl back into a tube. The metal is freezing, a sharp jolt of reality against your skin. You watch the dust motes dancing in the beam of your desk lamp. They drift lazily, caught in the slow-motion currents of the room, rising and falling with no particular destination. You realize your breathing has slowed to match their pace. The racing thoughts of the day, the deadlines, the chores, the social frictions feel like they belong to someone else, someone living in a much louder century. You are here to investigate the vanishing trails, the places that appeared on maps for hundreds of years, only to be erased when the ships finally arrived and found nothing but empty blue water. These are the Phantom Islands, the non-existent mountain ranges, and the kingdoms made of mist. As you sit here, the rain continues its monotonous lullaby against the glass. You feel the weight of your own limbs, the way your feet rest heavily on the Persian rug, the wool fibers soft and slightly coarse against your socks. You are perfectly contained in this moment of quiet inquiry. There is a large globe in the corner of the room, its surface yellowed and cracked. You reach out and give it a slow, effortless spin. It whirs softly, a dry, papery sound that reminds you of wind through dead leaves. You watch the continents blur into a single, sandy brown smudge, a world without borders, waiting for you to trace its forgotten paths. You are ready to begin. The ink is dry, the lamp is low, and the mystery is patient. You take a deep breath, tasting the dust and the rain, and you turn the first page. You step away from the heavy oak desk. The transition, so subtle, you barely notice the floorboards turning into cool, packed earth beneath your feet. Above you, the ceiling has dissolved into a velvet expanse of indigo, pricked with a million points of light that feel close enough to touch. You are standing at the entrance of a limestone cavern, perhaps in what we now call the Dordogne region of France. 17,000 years before the first city was ever built. You feel the damp chill of the stone against your palms, smelling the faint, metallic scent of wet minerals and ancient ochre. In the flickering light of a tallow lamp, you trace the outlines of a massive bull painted on the wall, noticing a cluster of 6 small dots hovering just above its shoulder, while most casual observers see a simple depiction of prehistoric wildlife. You recognize the Pleiades, a star cluster used by these early hunters to mark the shifting of the seasons, an obscure detail that suggests the first maps weren't of the land at all, but of the heavens. You reach into a small leather pouch at your waist and pull out a fragment of reindeer antler, its surface polished smooth by years of handling. It feels heavy and cold, a physical record of time passing in a world without clocks. You run your thumb over a series of 69 tiny, intentional pits carved into the bone, a mainstream archaeological find known as the Blanchard bone. Each pit represents a single night's observation of the moon, a lunar calendar that allowed your ancestors to to predict the tides and the migration of herds with rhythmic precision. It is a quirky realization that the first data visualization wasn't a graph or a chart, but a tactile pattern of holes in a bone, a map of the moon's slow dance across the sky that predates written language by tens of thousands of years. The air around you shifts, growing warmer and smelling of dry silt and baked brick as you find yourself in the heart of Mesopotamia. You are holding a damp clay tablet, the weight of it grounding you as the sun sets over the Euphrates. You watch an observer use a reed stylus to press small, wedge-shaped marks into the surface, cataloging the positions of the stars they call the 3 stars each. This mainstream Babylonian system divided the sky into 3 horizontal bands, a precursor to our modern celestial coordinates that helped them organize the chaos of the night. As you watch, you notice they are also tracking the path of the moon, an obscure ancient technique that treated the lunar orbit like a celestial highway, allowing them to predict eclipses with a mathematical precision that seems almost impossible for a culture that hadn't yet conceived of the telescope. You move again, the smell of salt spray hitting your face as you balance on the deck of a double-hulled voyaging canoe in the middle of the Pacific. The water is a deep, obsidian black, reflecting the sky so perfectly you feel as though you are floating in the center of a great, dark sphere. You look up at the zenith stars, those that pass directly over specific islands, a mainstream method used by Polynesian navigators to find tiny specks of land in a vast ocean. You notice the navigator isn't just looking at the stars, but also watching for T-Lapa, a quirky and mysterious phenomenon of underwater lightning, faint streaks of bioluminescence that point toward land, using the sea itself as a mirror for the celestial map above. A secret navigation tool passed down through generations of silent observation. You find yourself back in a quiet, dimly lit room, the transition marked by the smell of old papyrus and the faint scratch of a quill on parchment. You are looking at a reproduction of the Imago Mundi, the oldest known map of the world, etched into a clay tablet from the 6th century BCE. It depicts the Earth as a flat disk surrounded by a bitter river, a mainstream representation of the known world centered on the city of Babylon. However, as you lean in closer, you see the Maratu, or the Salt Sea, and realize the map includes strange, triangular regions beyond the ocean, labeled as distant lands where the sun is never seen. It is a quirky reminder that for the ancients, the map didn't just show where things were, but where the world simply ended, bleeding into the unknown regions of the stars. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the immense weight of the silence that exists between the stars. You consider how the Inca people of the Andes didn't just map the bright points of light, a mainstream practice in almost every other culture, but instead focused on the dark cloud constellations. You imagine looking up at the Milky Way and seeing not the stars, but the black voids of interstellar dust, identifying the shapes of llamas and foxes in the emptiness. It is a subtle, almost melancholic shift in perspective, realizing that the map is as much about the space between things as it is about the things themselves. A quiet lesson in finding meaning in the shadow of the universe. You feel a gentle breeze brush against your skin, carrying the scent of lavender and dry grass. You are standing in a field at midnight, far from the hum of any modern city, where the sky is so clear the Milky Way is bright enough to cast a faint, silvery shadow on the ground. You realize that for most of human history, this was the standard view, an overwhelming abundance of light that made the sky feel like a solid roof rather than a vacuum. You think of the obscure Great Rift, a dark band of dust that splits the galaxy in two, which ancient observers viewed as a physical path for the currents of the atmosphere. You take one last look at the spinning dome above, feeling small but connected, as you prepare to turn the page and follow the trail from the stars back down to the shifting sands of the earth. You leave the cold, crystalline air of the celestial observation deck behind, feeling the transition from the infinite space of the stars to the enclosed, heavy silence of a stone-walled chamber. The atmosphere here is thick with the scent of beeswax, old dust, and the faint, metallic tang of dried ink. You walk toward a massive, oak-framed display, your footsteps muffled by the weight of the air. Before you hangs the Hereford Mappamundi, a single, vast sheet of calfskin that has survived over 7 centuries. You reach out, not to touch, but to feel the radiant coolness coming off the vellum. This is not a map for navigation, but a map of the human mind's attempt to organize the chaos of existence. While most modern maps are designed to help you find your way, this one was designed to help you find your place in the grand design of the terrestrial world. You notice the skin is slightly translucent in the dim light, revealing the ghost of the animal it once was, with the spine of the calf still visible as a subtle ridge running down the center of the known world. Your eyes drift to the very center of the map, a point that medieval scholars considered the literal navel of the earth. You see a small, circular city intricately drawn with tiny towers and walls that look like the fine lace of a spider's web. Interestingly, if you look very closely, you can see a tiny pinprick hole in the exact center of this city. It is the mark left by the scribe's compass 700 years ago, the fixed point around which the entire circular horizon was swung. You lean in, smelling the faint, vinegary aroma of the oak gall ink that has bitten deep into the parchment. This central hub was not just a geographic location to the creators, but a philosophical anchor, a place where all human history was thought to converge. You find it curious that while this map represents the pinnacle of medieval cartography, the scribe who spent years on these details was likely a man named Richard of Haldingham, who left a small note in the corner, asking for the viewers to think of him as they traced his lines. You move your gaze upward, toward the top of the map, which represents the east. To the medieval mind, the rising sun was the source of all life. So the Orient sits where we would expect to find the north. At the very summit, you see a circular island surrounded by a wall of fire, a representation of a terrestrial paradise that no living human could ever reach. It is a lush, green sanctuary depicted with such vibrant, fading pigments that you can almost imagine the smell of crushed herbs and eternal spring. While most people assume medieval maps were purely imaginative, this section contains a surprisingly accurate list of mountain ranges in Asia, though they are often depicted as jagged, serrated teeth biting into the sky. A quirky detail catches your eye near the edge of this paradise. A tiny drawing of a banquet table, meant to represent the abundance of the far-off lands where the sun first touches the earth. A place where the air was said to be so thick with the scent of cinnamon that sailors could smell the coast before they could see it. As you follow the circular border of the world, your eyes wander into the southern reaches, a land the mapmakers called the monstrous fringes. Here, the geography dissolves into a bestiary of the impossible. You see a cypod, a man with a single, enormous foot, lying on his back and holding his limb aloft like a fleshy umbrella to shade himself from the blistering heat of the equatorial sun. It is a mainstream fact that these creatures were widely believed to exist in the unexplored parts of Africa and India, serving as a biological explanation for how humans might adapt to extreme climates. However, you notice a more obscure figure nearby, a blemi, a man with no head whose face is located directly in his chest. The artist has given him a surprisingly gentle expression, his eyes resting near his collarbones as he wanders a landscape filled with spotted lynxes and golden-scaled serpents. You feel a sense of calm detachment as you realize these were not monsters to the mapmaker, but simply the diverse possibilities of a world that had not yet been fully measured. You trace the coastline of the Mediterranean, which looks like a long blue finger poking into the heart of the continents. You find the British Isles tucked away in the bottom left corner, looking like a series of small, scattered crumbs at the very edge of the world. It is a well-known fact that the Hereford map is one of the largest and most complex TO maps in existence, a style where the world is divided into 3 parts by a T-shaped body of water. Yet, as you look at the labels for the continents, you notice a charming, centuries-old mistake. The scribe accidentally swapped the labels for Europe and Africa. You smile at the thought of a master craftsman working by the flickering light of a tallow candle, making a clerical error that would be preserved for a millennium. The ink in this section has faded to a soft, rusty brown, the result of a chemical reaction between the iron in the ink and the oxygen in the air, creating a visual record of time, itself eating away at the geography. Your focus shifts to the animals scattered across the plains of the map. You see an elephant, though it looks more like a large dog with a trumpet for a nose, reflecting the fact that the artist had likely never seen one in person. It was a common belief that elephants were the natural enemies of dragons, and the map depicts them as noble, sturdy guardians of the eastern paths. Tucked away in a small corner near the Mediterranean, you find an obscure drawing of a mandrake root, depicted not as a plant, but as a tiny, screaming human figure being pulled from the earth by a dog. The detail is so fine that you have to squint to see the individual hairs on the dog's back. You breathe in the cool, still air of the room, feeling the stillness of the map. It is a frozen moment of human understanding, a snapshot of a time when the world was small enough to fit on a single skin, yet large enough to contain every myth and memory the human mind could conjure. You prepare to move on, but you take one last look at the overall shape of the vellum. You realize that the entire map is shaped like a heavy, drooping cloak, mirroring the shape of the animal it came from. It is a mainstream fact that the Hereford Mappa Mundi was hidden under the floorboards of a cathedral for years to protect it from destruction during times of political upheaval. But as you look at the faint, shimmering lines of the labyrinth of Crete drawn in the lower corner, you learn an obscure secret. The map was once used as a teaching tool for travelers who would trace the paths with their fingers, leaving behind microscopic traces of oil and salt that have slightly darkened the most popular routes over the centuries. You feel the weight of those thousands of touches, a collective journey through a world that exists only on this skin. You turn away from the map, the image of the golden-walled center still burned into your mind, as you step back into the shadows of the hallway to follow the trail deeper into the vanishing history of the earth. You step through the final shadow of the corridor and find that the air has grown thick with the scent of brine and damp cedar. The floorboards beneath your feet are no longer stationary. They groan with a slow, hypnotic tilt, leaning you toward a horizon that smells of cold spray and ancient ink. You are standing on the deck of a 16th century galley, the wood smooth and worn like a river stone beneath your palms. The rhythm of the sea is a heavy, slow pulse, a heartbeat felt through the soles of your feet as the ship rises and falls with a deliberate, sleepy grace. You reach out and touch the rough texture of a rolled gazelle skin resting on a navigator's table, the surface cool and slightly oily to the touch. This is the masterwork of Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral who spent his life chasing the edges of the known world, only to end his days as a victim of courtly intrigue, leaving behind a legacy that shouldn't exist, much to the quiet frustration of modern cartographers. You unroll the parchment with a slow, deliberate motion, the dry crinkle of the skin sounding like a soft sigh in the quiet of the cabin. It is a portolan chart, a practical tool for sailors, yet it possesses a precision that feels almost anachronistic. capturing the coastlines of the Americas with a clarity that seems impossible for the year 1513. You trace the ink lines with a finger, feeling the slight ridges where the quill pressed deep into the hide. While most people recognize this map for its early depiction of the New World, it is less commonly known that Piri Reis claimed to have used a map drawn by Christopher Columbus himself as a primary source, a map that is now lost to time, making this fragment a ghost of a ghost. You notice a small illustration of a parrot in the corner, its feathers rendered in faded greens and reds, a whimsical detail from an admiral who was known to be so obsessed with accuracy that he supposedly kept a library of over 200 charts on his flagship, a floating archive that must have smelled perpetually of old dust and seawater. The ship lurches gently, a rhythmic cradle that makes your head feel heavy, and your thoughts move like slow-motion waves. You look toward the bottom of the map, where the coastline of South America takes a sharp, unexpected turn to the east. It follows a path that many observers swear is the subglacial coastline of Antarctica, Queen Maud Land, depicted as it would look without its massive shroud of ice. You feel a chill in the air, a phantom cold that doesn't match the warm salt breeze of the cabin. The mainstream scientific consensus is that this is simply a distorted extension of the South American coast. Yet, the way the mountains are drawn suggests a topographical knowledge that shouldn't have been available for another 300 years. It is a quiet, nagging puzzle, like a word on the tip of your tongue that refuses to surface. You lean closer, smelling the faint, metallic scent of the iron gall ink, and notice a peculiar drawing of a blemise, a headless man with his face on his chest, sitting on a rock. It is a nod to the common myths of the era, proving that even a man who could map the world with terrifying accuracy still had to fill the empty spaces with a bit of creative nonsense. You watch the shadows of the rigging dance across the map as the sun hangs low on the horizon, casting a long, amber glow over the Atlantic. The map is famous for its remarkably accurate longitudinal distance between Africa and South America, a feat of navigation that usually required a marine chronometer, an invention that wouldn't arrive for centuries. You run your hand over the compass roses, the intricate geometric patterns feeling like embossed lace under your skin. Curiously, the map was rediscovered in 1929 by a scholar named Gustav Diesmann, who found it tucked away in a pile of debris while cataloging the Topkapi Palace Library in Istanbul. It had spent hundreds of years ignored, a masterpiece of cartography used perhaps as a placemat or a scrap of leather, its secrets sleeping in the dark while empires rose and fell outside the palace walls. The water continues its steady, low-frequency hum against the hull, a sound that vibrates in your chest and slows your breathing to a deep, restorative pace. You realize that the Piri Reis map isn't just a guide to geography, but a map of human curiosity, a tapestry of lost knowledge, woven together by a man who saw the world as a single, connected entity long before the rest of us did. The salt air begins to feel heavy, pulling at your eyelids as the ship drifts further into the mist. You roll the gazelle skin back up, the leather soft and compliant, and prepare to leave the swaying deck for a different kind of silence. The mystery of the ice-free coast remains tucked in the folds of the parchment, a quiet enigma that doesn't demand an answer, only your witness. You turn toward the cabin door, the rhythmic creaking of the wood lulling you into a state of total calm as you move toward the next fragment of the vanishing trail. You step out onto the deck, your boots finding the damp, weathered planks of the ship's prow with a soft, rhythmic thud. The air here is thick, a heavy blanket of silver mist that tastes of salt and ancient minerals, clinging to your skin like a cool silk veil. This is the realm of advection fog, a scientific phenomenon where warm, moist air glides over the chilling currents of the deep, creating a world without edges or horizons. Sailors of the old world had a specific, weary name for the shapes that teased them through this haze. They called them Cape Flyaways, those deceptive silhouettes of peaks and forests that would materialize with the sunrise, only to dissolve into nothingness the moment the bow cut through the swell. You lean against the railing, feeling the steady, low-frequency vibration of the hull against your palms, realizing that the map tucked into your pocket is filled with these ghosts, places that were once as real to the mind as the wood beneath your feet, yet existed only in the quiet space between observation and desire. You turn your gaze toward the North Atlantic, where for 5 centuries the island of Hybrasil held its place on the charts of the most meticulous cartographers. It was often depicted as a perfect circle divided by a singular, straight river, a geometric dream floating off the coast of Ireland that first appeared on maps as early as 1325. There was a peculiar local belief that the island was cloaked in a permanent, impenetrable fog, revealing its lush green hills for only one day every 7 years to any lucky soul who happened to be sailing nearby. You imagine the smell of wet peat and wild clover drifting across the water, a scent so vivid it could convince a weary captain to drop anchor in a void. Even as late as the 1870s, seasoned mariners were still reporting sightings of its shores, perhaps hoping to find the legendary black rabbits that were said to inhabit its silent, misty meadows, oblivious to the fact that they were chasing a mirage of light and shadow. The scene shifts as the mist warms, turning a pale, tropical azure as you drift toward the Coral Sea in the South Pacific. Here lies Sandy Island, a slender sliver of land that occupied sea charts for over a century, and even found a home in the digital coordinates of modern satellite maps used by millions. It was only in 2012 that a research vessel, the Southern Surveyor, arrived at its supposed location and found nothing but 2,000 meters of dark, unobstructed water, it is now widely accepted that the original 19th century sighting by the whaling ship Velocity was actually a massive raft of floating pumice, a porous volcanic stone birthed from an underwater eruption that can drift for thousands of miles across the ocean. You can almost feel the rough, aerated texture of that ghost rock in your hand. A stone that defies gravity by floating like wood. A deceptive piece of the Earth's crust masquerading as a permanent sanctuary before eventually breaking apart and sinking into the deep. You move back into the quiet of the chart room, where the smell of beeswax and dried ink greeting you like a familiar, dusty friend. You notice how the edges of the maps are worn, darkened by the oils of 1,000 searching thumbs. It was common practice for cartographers to copy the works of their predecessors, passing down errors like family heirlooms to ensure they didn't leave a known territory blank and risk looking uninformed to their patrons. Some of these phantom islands were even intentional, serving as cartographic traps, fake landmarks, or trap streets of the sea designed to catch rival mapmakers who might try to plagiarize a colleague's life's work. You run your finger over a tiny, unnamed speck on the parchment, wondering if it was a genuine mistake of a squinting sailor or a silent sentinel placed there by a printer to guard their intellectual property with a lie. The ship continues its slow, rhythmic roll, a steady heartbeat that makes the heavy velvet curtains of the cabin sway in unison. You think of the Great Decree of 1747, a moment in history when King Ferdinand VI of Spain had to officially proclaim that California was not an island, finally ending a century of European maps that depicted it as a floating paradise separated from the mainland by a non-existent sea. It is a comforting thought as you settle deeper into the plush, cool fabric of your chair that the world was once so malleable that royal decrees were needed to physically tether land masses back to the continent. The fog outside the window is impenetrable now, a soft, white silence that asks nothing of you and offers no answers. You close your eyes, letting the phantom islands drift away into the archives of the forgotten. Content to exist in this quiet space where the map ends and the rest of the world begins. The fog outside the window is impenetrable now, a soft, white silence that asks nothing of you and offers no answers. You close your eyes, letting the phantom islands drift away into the archives of the forgotten. Content to exist in this quiet space where the map ends and the rest of the world begins. The air around you shifts, losing its damp, outdoor chill and replacing it with the heavy, comforting scent of boiled linseed oil and the sharp, acidic tang of fresh sap. You are no longer standing in the void. You are leaning against a sturdy, scarred workbench in a workshop that hums with a very specific manual industry. This is the Gymnasium Vossagents in the year 1507, a quiet corner of the world in the town of Saint-Dié, where a handful of scholars are currently redrawing the boundaries of existence. While most maps of this era are small enough to be tucked into a traveler's sleeve, the project before you is a titan, a 12-panel monster that requires the sacrifice of several sturdy pearwood trees. You run your fingers over a block of wood, feeling the coolness of the grain. It's remarkably smooth, chosen specifically because pearwood lacks the stubborn, erratic knots of oak, allowing a carver's knife to glide through it like a needle through silk. You watch the woodcutter work, his movements so rhythmic they mimic the slow, steady pulse of someone deep in a dreamless sleep. He uses a small, V-shaped gouge to peel away thin curls of wood, which fall to the floor in silent, pale ribbons. This is the birth of the Universalis Cosmographia, the most expensive map of its time, costing the equivalent of a small fortune for a single copy. As the blade bites into the wood, you notice a peculiar detail. The carver is meticulously etching a name onto a sliver of land in the southern hemisphere. It's the word America. It's a whimsical choice, really. The lead cartographer, Martin Waldseemüller, decided that since Europa and Asia were named after women, this new land deserved a feminine title derived from the Latin version of the navigator Amerigo Vespucci's name. It's a bit of casual 16th century branding that will eventually outlive the very wood it's carved into. The sound of the workshop is a symphony of soft abrasions. There is the scritch of the knife, the thump of the mallet, and the wet, sticky slap of the leather ink balls being dabbed onto the wood. The ink is a thick, midnight slurry made by mixing soot with oil, and sometimes a dash of burnt bread crusts to give it a deeper, more matte finish. You lean closer, smelling the earthy, burnt aroma of the pigment. While this map is famous for being the birth certificate of the Western Hemisphere, it also contains a strange, quiet error. It depicts a vast ocean to the west of the new continent, despite the fact that no European is supposed to have seen the Pacific for another 6 years. It's as if the woodcutter's blade knew more than the explorers did, carving a truth into the pearwood that the eyes of the world hadn't yet confirmed. You pick up a sheet of the paper, feeling its heavy, toothy texture against your thumb. It's not the flimsy, bleached pulp of your own time. This is rag paper, made from macerated linen and hemp, giving it a weight and a longevity that feels almost geological. If you hold it up to the dim light of the workshop, you can see the faint wire marks from the drying rack, a grid of shadows beneath the surface. This specific batch of paper is destined to be lost for nearly 400 years, disappearing from the world's sight until a researcher stumbles upon it in the unheated library of a castle in 1901. It's a strange thought to hold, that something so massive and significant could simply go to sleep in a drawer, waiting for centuries for the world to remember it exists. The press itself is a massive timber frame that groans under the strain of the screw mechanism. You watch as the inked woodblock is slid into place, the wet paper laid gently over it like a shroud. There is a moment of absolute stillness before the lever is turned. The pressure is immense, a mechanical gravity that forces the ink deep into the fibers of the linen. When the sheet is finally peeled away, the sound is a soft, sticky rip, revealing the intricate coastlines and the tiny, elegant calligraphy of the scholars. It's a masterpiece of 1,000 separate woodblocks. Yet Waldseemüller would later grow so unsure of his own work that he'd try to strip the name America from subsequent editions, attempting to replace it with terra incognita. He failed, of course. Once the ink is pressed into the soul of the paper, the name belongs to the world, not the man who carved it. You feel a wave of exhaustion watching the repetitive motion of the press. The workshop is warm, heated by the friction of the wood and the bodies of the workmen, and the air is thick with the dust of dried ink. You notice a small, quirky detail on the margin of the map, a tiny drawing of a sea monster that looks more like a confused carp than a terror of the deep. It was common for carvers to add these monstra to fill empty spaces, a bit of cartographic habit that served no scientific purpose other than to keep the eye from wandering into the blankness. You find yourself focusing on that little monster, its scales rendered in delicate black lines, until your own eyes begin to grow heavy. The rhythmic thump and slide of the printing cycle becomes a metronome for your breathing, a steady, mechanical heartbeat that tells you everything is in its right place. The ink on the final sheet is still wet, reflecting the dim light of the room like a dark, still pool. You reach out, not to touch it, but to feel the slight warmth radiating from the freshly pressed fibers. It's a massive undertaking, 12 sheets that, when joined, create a world that is both familiar and alien. You think about the sheer patience required to carve every single letter of the thousands of place names, a task that would take a modern person months of digital labor. Here, performed with a steady hand and a sharp piece of steel, the woodcutter wipes his brow with a stained sleeve, his job done for the day, leaving the map to dry in the quiet darkness of the gymnasium. You lean back, the scent of pearwood and soot lingering in your nostrils, as the workshop fades into the same soft, white silence that claimed the fog. The scent of the workshop fades, replaced by the dry, metallic tang of sun-scorched sand and the faint, sweet aroma of dried apricots. You find yourself standing not on a wooden floor, but on the edge of a vast, illuminated expanse of vellum. The air here is warm and still, carrying the heavy stillness of a desert afternoon. Beneath your feet, the ground feels like heavy, cream-colored parchment, smooth and slightly oily to the touch, as if it has been cured with the patience of centuries. This is the Catalan Atlas of 1375, and you are no longer a mere observer. You are a traveler stepping into a world painted in lapis lazuli and liquid gold, While most maps of this era were intended for scholars to ponder in quiet libraries, this one was originally mounted on 6 heavy wooden panels that folded like a screen. A piece of cartographic furniture designed to be touched and turned by the hands of kings. You reach out and feel the edge of the vellum, noting how thick and resilient it is, a sturdy stage for the history of the world. As you walk across the surface, the deep, resonant blue of the oceans catches your eye. It is a blue so intense it feels cold, a stark contrast to the heat of the desert scenes. This pigment is pure lapis lazuli, ground into a fine dust and mixed with egg white to bind it to the skin. It traveled thousands of miles from the mines of Afghanistan just to become the water on this map, and you can almost feel the grit of the stone beneath your fingertips. Abraham Cresques, the master cartographer who breathed life into these lines, was not just a drawer of maps, but a master of clocks and compasses for the King of Aragon. You notice a small, intricate compass rose nearby, first of its kind to appear on a map, its petals pointing toward a north star that sailors of the time called the Tramontane. It is a quiet, mechanical heartbeat in a world of hand-drawn wonders, a reminder that even in the 14th century, the world was becoming a place of precision and measurement. The sound of a distant, rhythmic clinking draws your attention toward the center of the map. You follow a line of tiny, meticulously painted camels, their humps swaying in a slow, hypnotic cadence. This is the Silk Road, a network of paths that feel like silk threads pulled tight across the skin of the earth. You can smell the dusty hide of the animals and the sharp, peppery scent of the spices tucked away in their heavy packs. It is a common misconception that the Silk Road was a single, paved highway. But as you walk alongside this painted caravan, you see it for what it truly was: a shifting, organic web of trails that changed with the seasons and the whims of local governors to avoid the crushing heat of the midday sun. These merchants often traveled by night, their movements guided by the same constellations that Cresques used to calibrate his royal clocks. You feel the cool night air of the desert in your imagination, the silver light of the stars reflecting off the gold leaf of the map's illustrations. Further south, the parchment glows with a brilliance that makes you squint. You are approaching the figure of Mansa Musa, the ruler of the Mali Empire, seated regally upon his throne. He holds a massive nugget of gold, rendered in actual gold leaf that has been burnished until it shines like a mirror. You lean in close, seeing the tiny indentations where the artist used a dog's tooth to polish the metal into a high sheen. While history remembers Musa as the wealthiest individual to ever live, a man whose casual spending once crashed the entire economy of Cairo for a decade. Here he is a silent guardian of the map's southern reaches. The gold leaf feels strangely cool under your hand, a metallic skin layered over the organic warmth of the vellum. It is a reminder that in this world, Wealth was not a number in a ledger, but a physical weight that could be felt, traded, and hammered into thin, shimmering sheets. The silence of the map is profound, broken only by the imaginary rustle of the wind through the painted palm trees of an oasis. You notice that the red lines crisscrossing the oceans, the rum lines used by mariners to find their bearings, are not drawn in common ink. They are a deep, earthy crimson, made from the crushed shells of Mediterranean Kermes insects. You run a finger over one of these lines, feeling the slight elevation of the pigment against the smooth vellum. It is a tactile guide for a journey that has no end. The Catalan Atlas does not just show you where things are. It invites you to feel the texture of the known world, from the rough grain of the crushed lapis to the oily smoothness of the calfskin base. As the sun of this painted world begins to set, the gold leaf catches the last of the light, casting long, amber shadows across the desert. You feel a deep sense of calm, the kind that comes from knowing exactly where you are in the vast, interconnected web of the world. The caravan moves slower now, the camel bells fading into a soft, metallic whisper that mimics the sound of your own breathing. The edges of the map begin to soften, the sharp lines of the coastlines blurring into the gentle, white silence of the background. You let out a long, slow breath. The scent of old parchment and cold stone lingering in the air as you prepare to move deeper into the quiet corridors of history, leaving the golden sands of the Silk Road behind you. The transition is subtle, like the shifting of a dream from one room to another. You step away from the imaginary heat of the Silk Road and find yourself standing in the cool, hushed sanctuary of the Bodleian Library in Oxford. The air here is different. It is heavy and still, carrying the scent of beeswax polish, cold stone, and the faint, vanilla-like aroma of decaying lignin in old paper. You feel the weight of the silence, a physical presence that presses gently against your skin, encouraging you to move with a slow, deliberate grace. Your footsteps make no sound on the polished floor as you approach a long wooden table where a single, oversized drawer has been left slightly ajar. You reach out, your fingers brushing against the cool brass handle, and pull the drawer open. Inside lies a scroll that has spent more time forgotten than remembered. This is the Selden map, a Ming Dynasty relic that arrived in England in 1659 and proceeded to be ignored for nearly 3.5 centuries. You lean in, the faint smell of ancient ink, and perhaps a hint of arsenic, used long ago to ward off paper-hungry insects wafting up to meet you. It is a mainstream fact that this map was donated by John Selden, a legal scholar who likely never saw the waters it depicts. But the quirky reality is that for generations of librarians, this priceless artifact was little more than a curiosity, a miscellaneous item tucked away, because no one quite knew how to read its secrets. You begin to unroll the map, the paper crackling with a sound like dry autumn leaves. It is surprisingly large, a wall of soft, fibrous paper that feels slightly textured under your fingertips, unlike the smooth vellum of European charts. You observe the ink, which isn't the harsh black of modern printing, but a deep, nuanced charcoal that seems to sink into the fibers of the page. The brush strokes are delicate, sweeping across the paper with a rhythmic confidence. While most maps of this era focused on the land, the Selden map is obsessed with the sea. You trace a finger along the fine, red lines that spiderweb across the South China Sea, representing the trade routes of the 17th century. It is a mainstream geographical fact that this map accurately depicts the Philippines and the Indonesian archipelago. But the obscure charm lies in the fact that the mapmaker didn't use a standard grid. Instead, the entire world is oriented toward the compass rose at the center, making the map a functional tool for a captain's hand rather than a scholar's wall. The colors are muted now, softened by the passage of hundreds of years into shades of sage green, dusty ochre, and pale indigo. You look closely at the depictions of the mountains, which rise from the coastlines like the humps of sleeping dragons, rendered with the same calligraphic flair as a poem. You notice how the map ignores political borders in favor of the flow of commerce and wind. It is an observational truth that the map reflects the monsoon patterns of the East. But there is a quiet irony in the fact that it was found in a cold, landlocked English library, thousands of miles from the warm, humid air of the ports it was designed to navigate. You can almost feel the phantom spray of salt water on your face as you follow the lines to the edge of the paper, where the ink fades into the natural cream of the unworked surface. Your eyes wander to the floral decorations in the corners, little bursts of botanical detail that seem almost playful in such a technical document. It is well known that Chinese cartography often incorporated artistic elements, but the quirk here is that these flowers aren't just decorative. They often represent the specific flora found at certain latitudes, acting as a secondary, silent guide for the observant traveler. You imagine the mapmaker sitting in a quiet studio, the sound of a bamboo brush scratching against paper the only noise in the room. Much like the quiet hum of the library around you now, the map doesn't shout its importance. It waits for you to notice the precision of its coastlines and the bravery of its empty spaces. You let your hand rest on the edge of the scroll, feeling the coolness of the paper. It is a secular marvel, a testament to human curiosity and the sheer physics of navigation, stripped of any need for mythological explanation. The trade winds are described not as breaths from a giant, but as predictable shifts in atmospheric pressure that a person could master with enough patience and a steady hand on the tiller. You realize that for 350 years, this map was a sleeping giant, a masterpiece of maritime science disguised as a dusty scroll. As you begin to slowly roll the paper back up, the sound is a soft, rhythmic thrum, a lullaby of history being tucked back into its bed. The lines of the east fade from view, the red trade roots vanishing into the roll, leaving you once more in the dim, comforting shadows of the library. You turn away from the table, the cool air of the Bodleian following you as you prepare to cross another threshold, the memory of the sweeping brushstrokes lingering in your mind like the afterimage of a setting sun. You step away from the table, the cool air of the Bodleian following you as you prepare to cross another threshold, the memory of the sweeping brushstrokes lingering in your mind like the afterimage of a setting sun. Your footsteps are muffled by the thick, woven runners that line the stone corridors, a sound like a soft sigh against the floor. You find yourself drawn toward a smaller, circular room where the ceiling rises into a dome, painted not with stars, but with the vast, creamy expanse of unworked plaster. It is here that you encounter the concept of the void, the beautiful and necessary silence of the map, known as terra incognita. While we often think of maps as dense thickets of information, the most honest parts of these ancient documents are the places where the ink simply stops. You run your fingers along the edge of a heavy, leather-bound atlas, feeling the grain of the hide, and you consider how terra incognita literally translates to unknown land, a phrase that served as a humble admission of human limitation. It is a bit of a charming myth that every old map was covered in warnings of monsters. In reality, the famous phrase "Hic sunt dracons," or "Here be dragons," is only verified to appear on a tiny handful of artifacts, most notably the Hunt Lennox globe, a copper sphere no larger than a grapefruit that sits silently in its own pocket of history. As you lean against the cool stone of the archway, you notice a large, unfolding chart that seems to celebrate the emptiness of the world. There is a certain psychological weight to this blankness, a concept known to historians as horror vacui, or the fear of empty spaces. For centuries, cartographers felt an almost frantic need to fill every square inch of parchment with something, anything, to avoid the terrifying silence of the unknown. You see this in the way they populated the interior of Africa, or the vast reaches of the Pacific with imaginary mountain ranges and elaborate compass roses. A particularly quirky example of this can be found in the work of the 16th century cartographer Orance Finet, who was so committed to his craft that he drew a world map in the shape of a human heart. It is a bit sentimental, perhaps, but it speaks to the intimate connection between the maps we draw and the way we feel about our place in the physical world, turning cold geography into something that beats with a rhythmic human pulse. The scent in this room is different. It smells of beeswax and iron gall ink, a sharp, metallic tang that settles in the back of your throat. You look at a map of the Nile, tracing the river upward toward its mysterious source. For over 1,000 years, mapmakers relied on the writings of Ptolemy who insisted that the great river began in the mountains of the moon. It is a lovely, evocative name for a place that no one could actually find. Yet it persisted on maps for 17 centuries, long after people should have known better. There is a strange comfort in that stubbornness, a refusal to let go of a beautiful idea just because it lacks evidence. You might find it amusing that an explorer named Diogenes, not the one who lived in a barrel, but a Greek merchant, claimed to have traveled inland for 25 days to find these lunar peaks, only to describe them as being covered in snow despite their proximity to the equator, a detail that sat comfortably on maps, while the rest of the world remained a blur of cream-colored vellum. You shift your weight, feeling the slight ache in your heels, and consider how the modern world has traded this mystery for the relentless clarity of the glowing screen. We live in an age of total surveillance, where satellites can count the leaves on a tree from orbit, leaving no room for the imagination to wander. Yet even our digital maps have their ghosts. You think of Sandy Island, a landmass in the Coral Sea that appeared on nautical charts, and even Google Maps for over a decade. It was a phantom, a cartographic error that persisted until 2012, when a research ship sailed right through where the island was supposed to be, finding nothing but deep blue water. It is a gentle reminder that even with all our lasers and sensors, we can still be by the shadows, and that there is a profound peace in knowing that the earth can still hide secrets from us, tucked away in the folds of the sea. The map before you now is drawn on gazelle skin, the surface feeling almost like silk beneath your hovering palm. This is a reproduction of the Peary Rise map, a 16th century document that has fueled countless late-night debates and fringe theories, because it appears to show the coastline of Antarctica centuries before the continent was officially discovered. Some people get quite worked up about it, suggesting ancient civilizations or lost technologies. But there is a much more grounded and perhaps more relaxing explanation involving the simple misinterpretation of South American coastlines. The map is decorated with tiny, hand-painted figures of parrots and six-horned oxen, a whimsical touch that makes the vast, terrifying ocean feel a bit more like a garden. It reminds you that the unknown doesn't have to be a source of anxiety. It can be a playground for the mind, a place where the rules of the everyday world are suspended in favor of something more fluid. You look toward the darkened corners of the library, where the shadows seem to mimic the Mare Tenebrosum, the sea of darkness that early sailors believed lay beyond the horizon. They imagined the Atlantic as a place where the water boiled under a perpetual sun, or where a giant magnetic mountain at the North Pole would pull the iron nails right out of a ship's hull, leaving the planks to drift apart like scattered matchsticks. It sounds a bit dramatic, sitting here in the stillness, but it reflects a very human need to give a face to the dark. You take a slow, deep breath, letting the coolness of the library settle into your lungs, and realize that the blank spaces on these maps weren't just failures of knowledge. They were invitations to rest, to stop the constant striving for answers, and simply exist in the quiet presence of a mystery. As you prepare to move toward the next gallery, you take one last look at a 19th century map of the moon, a curious thing called Gamble's map. It is a study in grayscale, capturing the craters and plains with a soft, charcoal-like texture that makes the lunar surface look like a bed of velvet. In those days, the far side of the moon was the ultimate terra incognita, a place that no human eye would ever see. And there is a deep, resonant comfort in that absolute privacy. You turn away from the circular room, leaving the blank spaces and the phantom islands behind, your mind feeling as light and unburdened as the uninked parchment, ready to follow the trail wherever it might lead next. You step out of the circular room and find yourself in a long, narrow gallery where the air smells of beeswax and the faint, sharp tang of iron gall ink. The transition is seamless, your feet moving silently over a floor of polished walnut that reflects the dim, amber glow of the lamps hanging from the ceiling. Before you, stretching across a table so long it seems to vanish into the shadows, is the Mitchell map of 1755. You approach it slowly, your fingers hovering just inches above the heavy, cream-colored parchment. It is composed of 8 massive sheets of paper joined together, a sprawling mosaic of ambition and guesswork that once dictated the fate of an entire continent. You notice the fine, spiderweb cracks in the varnish, a topographical map of time itself layered over the geography of the New World. It is a strange thought, isn't it, that this entire document, the most important map in American history, was compiled by a man named John Mitchell, who was actually a botanist and a physician, not a professional cartographer. He spent his days obsessing over the genus of wildflowers and the circulation of blood, only to find himself tasked with drawing the definitive lines of an empire. Your hand moves toward the edge of the map, where the paper feels thick and slightly textured, like the skin of a winter pear. You trace the boundary lines that were drawn during the Treaty of Paris, noting how the ink has faded to a soft, dusty charcoal. There is a certain irony in the way these lines were settled. The negotiators in 1783 used a copy of this map that had been heavily annotated with red crayon, a messy, human touch on a document that decided the lives of millions. You find the northwest angle, a strange, lonely chimney of land that juts up into Canada, a geographical hiccup caused by Mitchell's honest mistake. He believed the Mississippi River began much further north than it actually did, and the diplomats, sitting in their velvet chairs in France, simply followed his lead. They drew a line to a river source that didn't exist, creating a border that defies logic but remains etched into the earth to this day. It is a comforting sort of absurdity, the The idea that a tired man's ink smudge can become a permanent fixture of the physical world. As you lean closer, the scent of the paper becomes more pronounced, a dry, alkaline smell that reminds you of old libraries and forgotten attics. You follow the path of the Mississippi River as Mitchell envisioned it, a winding, serpentine ribbon that snakes across the parchment with a grace that belies its inaccuracy. He relied on the journals of explorers who often confused one tributary for another, leading him to include phantom features that were nothing more than rumors whispered over campfires. One such feature is the River of the West, a majestic waterway he hoped would lead to the Pacific, though it was little more than a cartographic ghost. You find yourself smiling at the thought of these early mapmakers, working by candlelight with nothing but quill pens and optimistic theories, trying to impose order on a wilderness they had never seen. There is a rhythmic quality to the engraving. The tiny, hatched lines that represent mountains looking like the scales of a sleeping dragon, rising and falling in a silent, stony breath. You move your gaze toward the Appalachian Mountains, which Mitchell depicted as a series of gentle, undulating ridges, much like the folds of a heavy wool blanket. In reality, these are ancient, jagged remnants of a collision between continents. But on the map, they look soft and inviting, a place where one might tuck themselves in for a long, undisturbed rest. You think about the way nature treats these human borders with a quiet, persistent indifference. While the map makers argued over degrees of latitude and the ownership of valleys, the mountains themselves were busy eroding, grain by grain, ignoring the names given to them by men in powdered wigs. It is said that the Missouri River, which appears on this map as a mere suggestion, has moved its entire channel by several miles in some places since the day Mitchell first dipped his pen into the inkwell. The earth is constantly shifting, a slow-motion dance of silt and stone that makes our rigid lines look like the scribblings of a child in the sand. You feel a sense of profound stillness as you contemplate the vastness of the landscape that Mitchell tried to capture. The map is a snapshot of a moment in time, a frozen image of a world that was already changing as the ink was drying. You notice a small, obscure detail near the coast, a tiny, hand-drawn anchor signifying a harbor that has since been reclaimed by the tides. It is a reminder that even our most permanent records are temporary, susceptible to the slow, rhythmic pulse of the ocean and the steady march of the seasons. The map is over 6 feet wide, a massive expanse of paper that requires you to walk several paces just to get from the Atlantic to the interior. And with each step, the floorboards emit a soft, rhythmic creak that sounds like the heartbeat of the building itself. You are surrounded by the weight of history, but it is a gentle weight, like the pressure of a heavy quilt on a cold night. The lines on the parchment begin to blur slightly as you stare at them, the intricate calligraphy of the place names turning into a decorative pattern of loops and swirls. You think about the surveyors who eventually went out into the woods to find the lines Mitchell had drawn, carrying their chains and transit levels through dense thickets and icy streams. They often found that the reality of the land bore little resemblance to the elegance of the map. Yet they persisted, hammering iron stakes into the frozen ground to mark the edge of one world and the beginning of another. There is a certain peace in knowing that no matter how many lines we draw, the rivers will always find their own way to the sea, carving paths through the rock that no map could ever truly predict. You let your breath out slowly, watching the way the lamplight flickers across the surface of the paper, casting long, soft shadows that dance over the phantom islands and the mistaken riverbeds. Your mind drifts to the concept of the empty quarter, the vast stretches of the map where Mitchell simply ran out of information and left the paper blank. These white spaces aren't frightening. They are invitations to rest, areas where the mind doesn't have to process names, borders, or histories. They are the quietest parts of the map, where the paper is smoothest and the ink hasn't dared to tread. You find yourself focusing on one of these blank patches, letting your thoughts become as pale and unburdened as the parchment itself. The world outside this gallery, with its rigid schedules and hard edges, feels increasingly distant, replaced by the soft, tactile reality of the Mitchell map. You are ready now to leave the shifting lines and the botanical dreams of John Mitchell behind, moving deeper into the quiet corridors of the archive, where the maps become even more mysterious and the air grows even more still. The archive's heavy oak doors seem to dissolve behind you, the scent of dry parchment and library dust fading into a cool, briny mist. You find yourself no longer walking on solid ground, but suspended in a vast, indigo silence. The transition is seamless, a quiet surrender to the weight of the water as you begin a slow, rhythmic descent into the world of the first bathymetric charts. You feel the pressure against your skin, a firm but gentle embrace that grows heavier with every foot you sink. It is common knowledge that we have better maps of the surface of Mars than we do of our own ocean floor. Yet, there is a peculiar comfort in this ignorance. In the late 19th century, the crew of the HMS Challenger spent 4 years dropping weighted ropes into this very darkness, unaware that the hemp lines they used would often swell and stretch in the salt water, adding phantom fathoms to their calculations and making the abyss seem even deeper than it truly was. You drift further down, the light from the surface thinning into a pale, flickering memory. The temperature drops, touching your skin with a crisp, refreshing chill that slows your pulse. You are moving through the bathypelagic zone now, a place where the concept of a map changes from a flat sheet of paper to a three-dimensional sculpture of shadows. While modern satellites use radar altimetry to measure the bumps on the ocean's surface caused by the gravity of underwater mountains, the early pioneers of the deep had to rely on sounding. a process as tedious as it was meditative. You can almost feel the phantom vibration of a lead weight hitting the silt miles below. A tiny thud in a world of absolute quiet. It is a quirky reality of history that for decades, the finest minds in geography believed the seafloor was a featureless, flat plain of gray ooze, a boring basement for the world, simply because their sampling tools weren't sensitive enough to catch the jagged truth of the terrain. As you glide deeper, a massive, dark shape begins to resolve beneath you. This is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a mountain range so vast it makes the Andes look like a collection of pebbles. You trace the jagged peaks with your mind, feeling the immense tectonic tension held in the basalt. In the mid-20th century, Marie Tharp sat in a cramped office in New York, meticulously plotting sonar pings onto paper to create the first comprehensive map of this hidden world. It is a charmingly dismissive footnote of history that her colleague, Bruce Heezen, initially called her discovery of the massive Rift Valley Girl talk, refusing to believe that the Earth's crust was pulling itself apart right under their feet. You feel the weight of that rift now, a deep, silent canyon where the world is constantly, quietly being reborn in plumes of mineral-rich water. The water around you is thick with marine snow, tiny flakes of organic matter drifting down like a slow-motion blizzard in a dark forest. It brushes against your face, a soft, ephemeral sensation that reminds you of the passage of time. While we often think of the ocean as a void, it is actually a dense archive of everything that has ever fallen into it. The first maps of this region were often decorated with isobaths, lines connecting points of equal depth, which look remarkably like the whorls of a fingerprint. Interestingly, because sonar data was classified as top secret during the Cold War, Tharp had to use a specific artistic style called physiographic mapping to depict the seafloor. This meant she drew the mountains and valleys as if they were seen from a slight angle, turning hard data into a beautiful, sprawling landscape of shadows that bypassed military sensors who were looking for traditional, top-down charts. You are now hovering over the abyssal plain, a place of profound stillness where the silence has a physical weight, like a heavy wool blanket. The scent here, if you could breathe it, would be of crushed stone and ancient, cold iron. It is a scientific fact that the pressure at these depths is enough to crush a titanium sphere. Yet, in this dream, you feel only a deep, stabilizing support. There is a strange, obscure beauty in the Telegraph Plateau, a relatively shallow stretch of the Atlantic floor that made the first transoceanic cables possible. When the first cable snapped in 1858, engineers spent weeks fishing for it in the dark. Their maps, little more than educated guesses, scribbled on the backs of envelopes. They were navigating a world they couldn't see, guided only by the tension in a wire and the rhythm of the waves above. The darkness here is not empty. It is a velvet texture that wraps around your limbs, encouraging you to let go of the need for direction. You are no longer a navigator, but a part of the map itself, a single point of awareness in a blue-black infinity. The maps of the deep remind us that there are still places where the ink hasn't dried, where the boundaries are fluid and the landmarks are hidden in shadow. You feel the slow, steady pull of the currents, the underwater winds that move vast volumes of water across the globe in a cycle that takes 1,000 years to complete. It is a soothing thought that there is a rhythm to the world so slow that it defies human urgency. You sink a little deeper, the last traces of the archives, dust washed away by the clean, cold pressure of the abyss. As the mountains of the deep rise up to meet you in a silent, stony embrace, you leave the crushing weight of the deep behind, the silent pressure of the abyss fading as you ascend through layers of memory and shadow. The transition is seamless, a slow-motion tilt of the world that carries you from the floor of the ocean to the floor of a high, circular observatory. The floor beneath your feet is no longer silt and stone, but polished mahogany, cool and smooth even through your socks. The air here is different, thin, crisp, and carrying the faint, dry scent of parchment and the metallic tang of brass. You are no longer looking down into the dark. You are looking up. Before you, spread across a table of heavy oak, lies a series of celestial maps, their edges curled like the petals of a dying lily. You reach out, your fingers brushing the surface of a star chart from the 17th century. The vellum is thick and slightly oily to the touch, a material made of animal skin that has survived centuries of flickering candlelight and curious eyes. It feels surprisingly warm, as if it has retained the heat of the suns it attempts to catalog. You trace the ink lines of the constellations, the black pigment raised slightly above the surface of the page. These are not the clinical dots and lines charts of a modern textbook. These are the works of Johannes Hevelius, where the stars are merely the skeletal frame for elaborate, muscular figures that seem to breathe in the dim light. You run your thumb over the constellation sextants, the sextant. It is a mainstream fact that constellations were the primary tools for navigation and timekeeping for millennia. A giant clock face that never needed winding, but there is a quieter, more personal story etched into this specific map. Hevelius created the sextants not because of an ancient legend, but as a silent memorial to his own life's work. He named it to commemorate the brass instruments that were lost when his observatory burned to the ground in 1679. You can almost smell the phantom scent of wood smoke clinging to the ink, a reminder that even the stars are sometimes used to map our private heartbreaks. Your gaze drifts to another chart, this one even more crowded with the ambitions of long-dead astronomers. You see figures that no longer exist in our modern sky. The Officina Typographica, a printing press made of stars, and the Machina Electrica, an early electrostatic generator. It is a well-known reality that the 88 constellations recognized today were formalized to create a universal language for science. However, it is a quirk of history that for a brief window in the 18th century, the night sky was a frantic billboard for the Industrial Revolution. Astronomers would tuck their favorite inventions between the legs of the Great Bear or under the tail of the whale, hoping to immortalize the technology of their day in the eternal firmament. You find a certain dry amusement in the thought of a printing press floating near the celestial equator, a testament to the human ego's desire to see its own tools reflected in the cosmos. The ink for these forgotten machines is a faded sepia, looking as though it might evaporate if you breathe on it too heavily. You move to the center of the room, where a large celestial globe stands on a tripod of blackened bronze. You place your hand on the sphere. It is cold, a stark contrast to the vellum on the table. As you give it a gentle nudge, it rotates with a low, rhythmic hum, the sound of metal grinding softly against metal. It is a mainstream fact that celestial globes are inside out, showing the stars as they would appear to an observer standing outside the shell of the universe, looking down at the earth. But this particular globe has a secret. In the late 1600s, the master cartographer Vincenzo Corneli built globes so massive that they featured small, disguised doors. If you were wealthy enough or influential enough, you could step inside the globe and stand in the center of a hollowed-out universe, watching the stars revolve around your own head in the correct orientation. You imagine standing in that dark, cramped space, the scent of fresh paint and glue surrounding you as you become the temporary axis of the world. The room seems to grow darker now, the shadows stretching across the mahogany floor like spilled ink. You look back at the charts and notice the zodiacal light, a faint, pyramid-shaped glow drawn in delicate charcoal. It is common knowledge that the ecliptic is the path the sun appears to follow across the sky, the stage upon which the zodiac signs perform their slow, annual dance. Yet you find your eyes drawn to the 13th sign, Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. It has been there since the time of Ptolemy, a giant man entwined with a snake, yet it was left out of the formal zodiacal count, simply because 12 is a much tidier number for a calendar than 13. You admire the symmetry of the exclusion, the way humans will prune the very stars to make the universe feel more organized, more manageable. The serpent's coils on the page are intricate, the ink shimmering with a faint, iridescent sheen that reminds you of a snake's scales. The heaviness in your limbs is becoming more pronounced, a gentle gravity that pulls you toward the soft velvet chair in the corner of the observatory. You think about the North Star, Polaris, and how every sailor for centuries has relied on its unwavering position. It is a mainstream fact that Polaris marks the celestial North Pole, a fixed point in a spinning world. But as you sink into the cushions, you remember the obscure truth of axial precession. The Earth wobbles like a slowing top. In a few thousand years, Polaris will no longer be the North Star. The title will pass to Vega, and then to others, in a cycle that takes 26,000 years to complete. The sky is not a fixed ceiling, but a slow, swirling liquid, shifting so gradually that a human life is too short to even notice the movement. You close your eyes, but the images of the maps remain etched on the back of your eyelids. You hear the faint, imagined sound of the music of the spheres. It isn't a melody, really, but a mathematical concept. The idea that the distances between the planets correspond to musical intervals, creating a harmony that is too perfect for the human ear to perceive. You imagine the universe humming to itself, a low-frequency vibration that resonates in your very bones. The scent of the observatory, the beeswax, the old paper, the cold metal wraps around you like a heavy wool blanket. The mythical figures of the constellations, the bears and the hunters, and the forgotten machines, all seem to step off the vellum and drift into the air around you, their starlit limbs moving in a slow, silent procession. You are no longer tracing the maps. You are becoming part of the geography of the night, a single point of warmth in a vast, cool, and beautifully charted dark. The trail has not vanished. It has simply led you here, to the edge of the world, where the only thing left to do is let go and drift into the star-flecked velvet of sleep. You feel the weight of the evening pressing against your shoulders, a soft, invisible blanket of gravity that signals the end of your cartographic journey. Your hands resting on the edge of the heavy oak desk feel distant and peaceful, as if they belong to someone already halfway into a dream. The air in the study is thick with the scent of old things, dried ink, beeswax, and the faint, vanilla-like aroma of decaying lignin from the hundreds of books lining the walls. You reach out, your fingers making contact with the first of the maps spread before you. The vellum is cool and slightly textured, like the skin of a sun-dried fruit, and it resists your touch with a gentle, papery stiffness. You begin to roll it, slowly and deliberately. The sound is a low, rhythmic rasp, a dry whisper that fills the quiet room like the rustle of autumn leaves being stirred by a tired wind. As the parchment curls back into its natural cylinder, you feel a sense of completion. You pick up a thin ribbon of tanned leather, its surface smooth and supple from years of handling. You wrap it around the center of the roll, the friction of the leather against the parchment, creating a soft, tactile hum that vibrates through your fingertips. You tie a simple knot, pulling it just tight enough to hold the secrets of the vanishing trails in place. There is no hurry. The world outside the window has dissolved into a smudge of charcoal and indigo, and the only geography that matters now is the few square feet of warmth surrounding your chair. You move to the next map, your movements becoming more fluid, more automatic. Each roll is a closing of a door, a quiet tucking away of the unknown. You notice the way your pulse has slowed, matching the deliberate pace of your hands, the gentle sarcasm of the day, the frantic need to know exactly where one is at all times seems laughable now. You are nowhere in particular, and that is exactly where you need to be. The smell of the leather ribbons reminds you of old workshops and quiet libraries, places where time is measured not by clocks, but by the slow accumulation of dust and wisdom. You stack the rolled maps into a small wooden crate at the corner of the desk. The wood is unfinished and smells of cedar, a sharp, clean scent that cuts through the mustiness of the paper. As the last map is placed inside, the physical evidence of your investigation is hidden away, leaving the desk top bare and dark. You lean back, and the chair groans softly under your weight, a familiar, comforting sound that seems to acknowledge your exhaustion. Your eyes trace the flickering shadow of the lantern flame as it dances across the spine of a nearby atlas. The light is a warm, amber glow, but it is shrinking, the oil in the reservoir running low, mirroring the ebbing of your own wakeful energy. You reach for the small brass knob of the lantern. The metal is warm, almost hot, but not unpleasantly so. It feels solid and real against your thumb and forefinger. You give the knob a tiny, experimental turn, watching the wick descend. The flame shrinks, turning from a bright teardrop into a thin, blue line. The shadows in the room lurch forward, stretching their long, dark fingers across the floorboards toward your feet. You smell the faint, acrid scent of charred cotton as the light dies, followed by the sweet, heavy smell of the cooling lamp oil. The darkness that follows is not empty. It is a plush, velvet presence that settles over you like a heavy cloak. It is the darkness of a world before maps, a vast and uncharted territory where the only requirement is to exist and to breathe. Your breathing is deep now, originating from the very center of your chest. With every exhale, you feel the tension leaving your jaw, your neck, and your hands. The desk, the chair, and the crates of maps begin to lose their edges in your mind, blurring into the soft periphery of sleep. You shift your weight, feeling the softness of the fabric against your skin, the way the air in the room has cooled just enough to make of a heavy quilt feel like the greatest luxury imaginable. The mysteries of the vanishing trails are no longer puzzles to be solved, but lullabies to be felt. They are the white spaces on the map where the mind goes to rest, the terra incognita of the subconscious, where the lines of logic fade into the curves of dreams. You are drifting now, a single point of consciousness floating in a sea of star-flecked velvet. The maps are rolled, the ribbons are tied, and the lantern is cold. There is nothing left to find, nothing left to prove, and nowhere left to go. The trail hasn't disappeared. It has simply reached its destination at the center of your own quiet rest. The silence of the room is absolute, a thick, comforting silence that cushions you from the world. You let your head sink back, your eyelids finally winning their long, gentle battle against the light. You are part of the darkness now, a part of the unmapped night, safe and still and entirely at peace. Sweet dreams.